Becoming Naomi Leone, Chapter 13. A Sleuth of Bears. Naomi, are you going with us? Called Graham. I stood behind a giant zucchini plant with Owen and Reuben, gawking at the garden spider that was as big as my hand. Coming, I said, quickly leaving the boys to their treasure and hurrying to join Fabiola, Flora, and Graham, who were already at the front gate. I didn't want to miss meeting the cheese lady. We walked through the uneven streets of Barrio Hadlatlaco to El Mercado, the market. Even though they were out in the neighborhood, Fabiola and Flora still wore long bib aprons over their clothes. Graham had not deviated from her pantsuit and running shoes. They all carried big mesh bags for the groceries. I hugged my notebook, wanting it handy in case I was lucky enough to make another entry to my newest page. Everything we know about our father. 1. His name is Santiago Zamora Leon. We know this for sure because Graham dug out our birth certificates. 2. Santiago Zamora is also the name of a town in Guatemala, but Fabiola said it is only a coincidence. 3. He lives in Puerto Escondido near the ocean in the state of Oaxaca. Puerto Escondido means hidden port in Spanish. 4. Puerto Escondido is a long way from Oaxaca City, maybe 5 hours of driving. 5. He is a fisherman and has a boat. 6. He is a carver. 7. In Graham's eyes, he was always a good, kind man. 8. Once, he wanted us. After 5 blocks, we reached a building that looked like a big white warehouse. On the front, giant red letters formed the words Mercado de la Merced. I expected a grocery store or a supermarket, but this was different from any I had ever seen. Inside, stalls and tables crowded the cement floor room. It was a party of colors and smells. Flowers, tortillas, packages of fireworks, piñatas, fruit, raw meat, herbs and vegetables, ground spices in big canning jars. An entire table of different types of chiles towered as high as my shoulders. I smelled strawberries and oranges from the fruit juice stand. A woman sat on the floor next to a big steam pot and sold tamales while she nursed her baby. We found the cheese lady balanced on a high stool behind the counter with small wheels of white cheese stacked up around her. Behind her on the wall, a sign read, Quesillo. Quesillo, I said, sounding out the word. Flora and Fabiola nodded approvingly. It's pronounced Quesillo, said Fabiola, but you are learning very fast, Naomi. The woman pulled long 2-inch wide strips from the cheese wheels and wrapped them into giant balls. Flora pointed to one, and the lady weighed it on a scale. Then expertly packaged it in white paper and handed it over. Fabiola and Flora began visiting with her, and I heard the name Santiago Leon. I studied the woman's face for recognition. Was she a relative? Did she know my father? Would she know how to find him? I gazed up at her, hoping as if she was a queen about to tell me my destiny. The lady looked at me, smiled, and handed me a strip of cheese. She married a Leon, said Fabiola. She has not heard of your father. But her husband has many cousins she has not met, and some live near the ocean. She will ask the family tonight, and will call if she finds out anything. Flora was already writing her number on a piece of paper and handing it through the stacks of cheese wheels. I waved at the lady before we turned away. The strip of cheese was similar to the string cheese that Graham used to buy in Lemon Tree at the supermarket, only creamier and softer. I decided that quesillo was my new favorite food in Mexico. I flipped through my notebook and started a new list. Superb Spanish words. 1. Jalaplaco. 2. Mercado. 3. Quesillo. Later I added 4. Mole, the type of sauce on the tamale we ate on El Mercado patio, and Piña Coco, the pineapple coconut ice cream I licked all the way home. That night, Bernardo's cousin Benny came for dinner. He was as short as Bernardo, but much younger, and seemed more like a son than a cousin. He entertained us by making silly faces at Reuben and Owen, which sent them into fits of giggles. Bernardo had brought some of my carvings inside for the centerpiece on the dinner table. Benny carefully examined them. Very good, he said. Every time the phone rang, I thought about the cheese lady. Had she arrived home from work yet? Did she ask her husband if he knew my father? So far, the only calls he had been for Graciela. Everyone seemed to talk at the same time during dinner. Spanish songs hummed on the radio in the background, and food platters rocked gently from hand to hand. I concentrated on the chicken with red gravy that was very spicy. Fabiola had made quesadillas, too, from big flour tortillas folded in half. Inside, el quesillo melted over yellow squash blossoms. I ate every bite. This was a far cry from Thursday pork chops. When dinner was over, everyone stayed at the table and drank coffee and hot chocolate while we talked about the radish competition. Fabiola translated. Let's do a traditional scene, a church or a nativity, said Pedro. Benny shook his head. We did that last year, and we did not even place in the top 5. He pulled out some papers from his pocket and unfolded them. He held up the first sketch, a scene with spaceships and aliens. No, groaned Bernardo and Pedro. The next was a drawing of a marching band. More groans. Then a church. Everyone does La Catedral, said Flora, shaking her head. They argued, their voices growing louder. Benny slammed his fist on the table and then got up and walked outside. Bernardo and Pedro shrugged their shoulders and threw their arms in the air. Why are they so angry? Graham asked. Because they wish to create something different this year, something that will catch the eyes of the judges. They all have their own ideas, and they are all stubborn. They must decide on their presentation soon. The radishes are delivered from the field next week. Then they have only 3 days left to carve. In 5 minutes, Benny was back, and the man pored over the sketches again. I thought it was funny that he got mad and then came back, and pretended there hadn't been a crossword between them. The phone rang, and when Flora answered it, she glanced at me. I crossed my fingers for good luck. Please let it be good news. After a short conversation, Flora hung up and reported back to Fabiola. The woman we met today, said Fabiola, her husband has no relatives named Santiago Leon, who live in Puerto Escondido. I am sorry. Graham's shoulders sagged a little. Couldn't we try the phone book? I said. Naomi, I thought of that, and there are 4 pages of Leons and no Santiagos, said Graham, wearing her disappointment. If it's our last resort, I'll try it, but we might as well look for a needle in a haystack. We can't give up, I said. What about Bernardo's friends? Remember? The ones who brought our father to Lemon Tree when he met Skyla? Bernardo looked at me sadly. No, Naomi. Those men have not lived here for many years, but the carving community is very knowing about the business of each other. On La Noche de los Rabanos, hopefully someone will know something about Santiago Leon. See, I said, looking at Graham. Well, let's hope that works out, because if he doesn't show up at the festival, we won't have time to go on a wild goose chase to another part of the state. What was the matter with Graham? What happened to all her self-prophecy talk and planting the sunshine in her brains? Had she forgotten what could happen to me if we didn't find my father? The next day before breakfast, Graham called Mrs. Maloney from Flora's phone to check on things. Skyla and Clive came back to Avocado Acres from Las Vegas, she reported to me and Owen as we sat in Baby Beluga. They had Clive's daughter with them. I guess she is a sad-faced thing. Skyla had always received copies of my temporary guardianship papers and was none too happy. When she found us gone, she marched over to Mrs. Maloney's to play 20 questions about where we were and when we'd be back. That sweet old thing just told them we'd gone on a little holiday vacation. What did they do? I asked. They traipsed through the grove to Fabiola and Bernardo's and found them gone, too. Mrs. Maloney watched them come back and get into the car. Then they left. Only, there's something I didn't think about before we took off. It might be nothing, but Skyla knows about this festival that Santiago comes to every year, and she knows that Fabiola and Bernardo are from the same town. It wouldn't be hard for her to put two and two together about where we might have gone. Would she come here? Asked Owen. No, she would have no reason to come. Technically, she can't touch you until the judge makes a decision, said Graham, looking at us and wringing her hands. But, according to the fine print on the guardianship papers, I probably wasn't supposed to take you out of the country. If Skyla suspects, and could prove that I did, by letting the authorities know or hiring an investigator, well, it wouldn't look good to the mediator or the judge. Graham, I whined, not believing what I'd heard. Why hadn't you warned us about all this before? Maybe I'm letting my imagination run pell-mell. I just wouldn't put anything past Skyla at this point. I didn't want to take the chance that Graham's imagination was right. I wanted to find my father, and the sooner the better. I hadn't been able to forget about the phone book. I asked Graciela how to say, I'm looking for Santiago León in Spanish. It was simple. Busco a Santiago León. I wrote it in my notebook. She didn't seem to suspect anything. And after she and Pedro left for work, and Flora, Fabiola, and Graham left to do the daily marketing, I told Owen what I wanted to do. Somebody has to know him or be related to him, but you have to keep it a secret, okay? Why? I don't want Graham putting a stop to it because she doesn't want us imposing on Flora's phone, or because she doesn't want us talking to strangers, or because she doesn't want us bothering folks with unnecessary calls. You know how particular she can be. Can Ruben help? Asked Owen. Yes, but he can't tell. Can you make him understand? Ruben understood. We made a system. Owen read off the number from the phone book. I dialed and asked for Santiago León. A lot of people hung up immediately or said no. No. If I shook my head, Ruben crossed the number off the list. If the person on the other end of the line said anything other than no, I handed the phone to Ruben to talk to them in Spanish. Sometimes Ruben had a long conversation with people he didn't know and gave out his name and number. I was sure Graham would not approve. When we heard Flora, Fabiola, and Graham come through the gate, we closed the phone book. Mañana? Asked Ruben. Yes, tomorrow. We'll try again mañana, I said, tapping my fingers to my mouth to remind him and Owen to keep quiet. The next morning, Ruben became more animated in his telephone conversations, and occasionally I heard our names thrown in as well. What was he telling these strangers? We made slow progress through the phone book, but at least I felt that by saying our father's name over and over, it was somehow bringing us closer to him. We still had 9 days until the festival. Again, as soon as we heard the front gate and the women's voices, we hung up the phone. The boys took off to play, and I grabbed my box of carvings and headed to the table. I had been carving bears for the past few days. When Graham walked into the kitchen, I was buffing the most recent one with a towel. It looks like you've been busy, said Graham. Very busy, I said seriously, as I added a cub to the long migration that crossed the table.